Hi, my name is Molly, and because I am currently in Illinois for an internship, I will be doing my Florida History podcast on the Lincoln Home National Historic Site in Springfield, Illinois, where I currently work, and I hope you enjoy it. So, in order to understand the significance of the Lincoln home, it's necessary to first understand where Abraham Lincoln came from. Abraham Lincoln was actually born in Hodgenville, Kentucky, in a one-room log cabin to his father, Thomas Lincoln, and his mother, Nancy Hanks. The family was quite poor and lived in one-room cabins on the frontier in Kentucky and Indiana for most of Abraham's life. Um, After Abraham's mother died of milk sickness, Abraham's family consisted of his father, his sister, his stepmother, who he actually had a great relationship with, his step siblings, and Dennis Hanks, who was related to his first mother, and they all moved to Illinois in 1830. Interestingly enough, Abraham Lincoln actually had less than a year of formal schooling and pretty much taught himself how to read. Reading ended up becoming one of his favorite pastimes, and as a child, some of Abraham Lincoln's favorite reads included Aesop's Fables. As an adult, he really enjoyed reading William Shakespeare and Charles Dickens, whose sculptures, coincidentally, are on a shelf in his parlor at the Lincoln home. So, when Abraham Lincoln was old enough, he started working on a flatboat, which was a large flat bottom boat used for ferrying cargo. It was during this time that Abraham Lincoln traveled down the Mississippi into the southern states to start delivering that cargo. And these trips are presumably where Abraham Lincoln would have had his first acquaintances with slavery. While in New Orleans, historians believe that it's very likely he would have witnessed some of the slave auctions, which may have informed some of his views about slavery later on down the road. Also, during this time, Lincoln was required to hand over any money that he earned on the flatboat to his father, and this was required by law. And so he dutifully did that until about 1831, when he finally split from his family at the age of 22. His family moved one direction, and Abraham Lincoln himself moved to New Salem to start his own life. And in New Salem, he worked several jobs. He worked as a store clerk and a surveyor and postmaster. He had two romantic interests there. One of them died, and the other one kind of rejected his sort of half-hearted marriage proposal. All of the while, he's still studying law books and aspiring to be a lawyer. By 1837, New Salem is starting to falter as a settlement, and Abraham moved to Springfield to experiment, as he said, as a lawyer. Upon arriving in Springfield at the age of 28, Abraham Lincoln was in lots of debt with all of his belongings in two saddlebags on a horse. A young man named Joshua Speed, who owned a store, saw how depressed Lincoln looked when he walked in, and just like that, he offered Abraham Lincoln the shared bedroom upstairs, and they became roommates. Lincoln, of course, he gladly accepted, and a lifelong friendship between the two of them was born. Shortly after, Lincoln was able to become a lawyer alongside Mary Todd's cousin. He also began working as a politician in the Whig Party and found success both as a lawyer and a politician. After a kind of tumultuous courtship, Abraham Lincoln finally married his wife, Mary Todd, in 1842. They stayed for a while at the Globe Tavern boarding house, where Mary gave birth to their firstborn son, Robert Todd Lincoln. Eventually, Abraham purchased the first and only home he would ever own from the Reverend Charles Dresser, who actually married him and Mary 2 years before. So, the home you see in this picture is the only home that Abraham Lincoln ever owned, and here he lived for 17 years until he left for the White House in 1861. When he bought this house in 1844, it did not have that second story that you see in the picture. In fact, the home was actually about half this size when he initially bought it. But over the years, Abraham Lincoln is working very hard. He's growing in wealth and prominence as a lawyer and a politician, and the house is growing with him. As he slowly ascended into upper middle class status, Lincoln added more rooms, and he was able to expand the home to accommodate his growing family. And he needed the space because his wife gave birth to three more children in this house. They brought with them their firstborn, which was Robert, and then Mrs. Lincoln had Eddie, and then Willie, and then Tad here in this house. They acquired a large golden dog named Fido and a horse named Old Bob and a sizable collection of cats, of which Mr. Lincoln was known to be fond of. Mrs. Lincoln actually joked that cat collecting was Abraham Lincoln's hobby. And in this house, Abraham Lincoln was more than just a lawyer and a political figure. He was a neighbor and a crazy cat person and a husband and also a father. So the rooms you see in this picture are the formal parlor rooms, and this is where the Lincolns would have welcomed their most fanciest formal guests like new friends and political acquaintances of Mr. Lincoln. And when the Lincolns first moved in, that back area over there in the back, that was actually their bedroom. It was in that space where the Lincolns' second son, Eddie, sadly died at the age of 4 from tuberculosis. After that, Mrs. Lincoln understandably fell into a terrible depression, and she was probably drawn out of that depression only by the knowledge that she was actually going to have a third son, which ended up being Willie. As Abraham worked harder and harder, he was eventually able to move the bedrooms upstairs and expand this parlor space so that he would have more room to welcome people. And that same back area where Eddie died years before is also where Abraham welcomed in a party of men from Chicago around 8 p.m. on May 19, 1860, when he was offered the Republican nomination for the presidency. So, therefore, part of the reason that this house is significant to the history of Illinois and the nation as a whole is because it's a place where Abraham Lincoln experienced great happiness and great sorrow over 17 years that he lived in this house. So, throughout the years that the Lincolns owned this house, the home actually underwent 3 major renovations in order to make the house more befitting of a growing upper middle class family. The room in this picture is obviously the kitchen, and this is where Mary, who was actually raised by a Kentucky slave-owning family, would have had to teach herself how to cook. Wall to wall, this room was also about the same dimensions of the one-room log cabin where Abraham Lincoln was born in Hodgenville, Kentucky. The cabins that he would have stayed in after that, for most of his youth in fact, would not have been much bigger than this room right here. So this room alone is really a perfect showcase for how far Abraham Lincoln was able to come in his lifetime. Through hard work and dedication, he was able to go from a room of this size and expand the walls of his world to include this grand 10-room home for himself and his family. And of course, he was on his way in 1861 to an even bigger house, right? The White House. So he really came a long way here in Springfield and in this home. In addition to the home, the National Park Service also preserves the 4-block Lincoln neighborhood as well. And this is because many of Abraham Lincoln's most deeply held beliefs about equal opportunity and the right to rise were born right here in Springfield and in this neighborhood that he lived in. Lincoln's neighborhood was actually very economically and racially diverse for the time. But the Lincolns still, of course, they worked to be good neighbors and responsible citizens in their community. By keeping a hired girl that they paid $1.50 a week instead of a servant, Mrs. Lincoln was actually providing a great service to the young girls of her community. Serving as a hired girl to an up-and-coming family like the Lincolns was one of the few jobs that a teenage girl could have at the time and still remain respectable in society. Plus, it would have provided her an opportunity to earn money and homemaking skills before it was then time for the girl to go off and start her own family. And the Lincolns, they of course believed that everybody should have the same opportunity to grow and better themselves, so they actually offered the job of a hired girl to girls of all different races. Records show that the Lincolns kept Irish and Portuguese and African American hired girls as well. Additionally, the Park Service also preserves the former lot of one of Lincoln's most interesting neighbors, in my opinion. He was a free African-American man named Jamison Jenkins, and although Jenkins worked as a drayman for his day job, he also served as a conductor on the Underground Railroad, and this was happening just 2 to 3 doors down from Abraham Lincoln. Perhaps Jenkins maybe would have informed some of Abraham's beliefs about equality. And of all of the people that Abraham Lincoln could have asked for a ride to the train station, where he delivered his famous farewell address and then moved on to the White House, Lincoln actually asked Jamison Jenkins, the Underground Railroad conductor, for a ride. So this site ultimately is significant to more than just Springfield. It's important to the entire nation. This is a site that preserves the Lincoln's home, where he served as a loving father and neighbor and a husband, and here he was more than just a face on the front of the penny. He This site preserves his neighborhood, which would have informed so many of his beliefs about equality and equal opportunity. It's also a site that recalls the memory of Abraham Lincoln and commemorates his life's journey, and reminds all Americans of the sacrifices that he made, so that with a little hard work and dedication, we all could do just as he did, so that we could all go from having almost nothing to creating something truly remarkable for ourselves. And regardless of where we come from, all of us could pursue life, liberty, and happiness as we see fit, thanks to Abraham Lincoln's great achievements. And so, a big thank you to Abraham Lincoln. May your home and your memories stick around for another 178 years and possibly be cherished even longer. This now concludes my podcast, and I hope you enjoyed it. Have a wonderful day.